Okay, I'm live. Whatever that means. I'm using a really pretty awful laptop for this. I'm using the internal microphone and everything. There's absolutely zero real thought put into this. Just chilling out, me and the dog. Lucy's here, just having a good time. Watched a show this morning. I rambled about it on the only place I shared this link, so I'm sure the one person who's watching probably knows what I'm talking about. Um, the Midnight Gospel. It's Duncan Trussell, who I've never heard of until today. I've never heard of him. I don't even know if I can be heard. I just now saw the microphone level down there, and it seems really quiet. I don't know. I got Discord open in the background. Maybe someone will tell me if I can't even be heard. Um, Sidetrack. Um, it's an interesting show. Never really heard of Duncan Trussell. I don't know how I haven't. He's been on the Joe Rogan podcast a lot, actually. I don't know if they're really good friends or anything. I don't know anything about him, but the guy seems really either into it or interested in some shape, form, or fashion. I don't know if he practices any of it, but he's into things like the occult, like mindfulness, like general spirituality in a more new age sense. And I don't know what it would take for someone to consider themselves into those things, but I like to consider myself into them, whatever into means. Uh, I find them fascinating personally, is what I mostly mean. And I think they often contain a lot of what's the term I want to use here? I think the insights offered by things like occultism, like esoteric groups. I feel like a lot of the insights these groups have, while not necessarily universal truths, I think they offer aspects of the truth that other frameworks, I won't say don't get at or don't have, but often don't emphasize in a similar way. So I guess what I want to kind of talk about is what some of the not necessarily the insights that I got off that show, because I want to ruminate on it more before I just say how I feel about it. But it did make me think a lot. And I guess I kind of want to talk about just the sort of thought process it ties you through. I don't know what I want to talk about really. I don't know why I started this live stream. I don't know. Maybe I just wanted to get it out in the air and out of my head so I could think about it later. And YouTube offers the opportunity for others to comment on it and give me different ideas. So, what did I want to say about that? They talked a lot about death, both in a physical and metaphysical sense. They talked about ego death. They talked about physical death because here's a story. If you watch the show, I won't consider this a spoiler, really. I mean, the show storyline is so loose. It's more of a philosophical, musing of a sort. It's taken from Duncan's podcast. Everything on the show is taken from his podcast, so nothing's really a spoiler. But here's just some life things about him, and it becomes relevant to the show. And I think going into it knowing this, especially with the final episode, going into it knowing this makes it more meaningful. It sure did for me. His mom, she died in 2013. Hello. She died in 2013 from cancer. And I feel like, she was just like, I'll put it this way. I wanted to figure out how I wanted to say this. I'll say it this way. She died of cancer in 2013. And this conversation he had with his mom is, I think, from 2010 or so, maybe even earlier, or maybe a little later. But they talk a lot about death because it wasn't cancer that kind of caught her out of the blue, just died and then found out it was cancer afterwards. They knew for, I think, 4 years at least at the time of the recording of the podcast, that she was going to die. And they had a really good conversation about death. And she was a psychologist, a professional psychologist for a portion of her life. And she offered some unique perspective on death. Maybe they're not unique. Maybe it's unique to me, because I don't, as grim as my mindset may sometimes be and my fixation on darker things, I don't think I am very conscious of death and what that entails, especially I'll go on this little rabbit trail. I mean, Christianity and Judeo-Christian mindsets, which is most of the Western world, especially in America, I feel like we are numbed to the idea of death and what that entails. I feel that we are sort of separated from death. And a lot of people have experienced personal loss, and this is something they go into on that show. A lot of people, everyone experiences loss on some level, even if you don't have many people you're close to, whether it's yourself or others. Mortality is something that everyone wrestles with in some shape, form, or fashion. And I feel like in the West, with the Judeo-Christian mindset that we have inherited, which I don't think is necessarily a classical conception of Judeo-Christian mindsets because of a whole host of historical reasons, but I won't go into that. What did I want to say? I feel like our separation from death has ultimately caused a lack of consciousness about death. And I think that lack of consciousness about death has led to, my dog wants to go out. Come with me. Come with me as I let the dog out. I think that lack of consciousness about death has led to a lack of meaningful reflection on what it means to be alive. And what does that mean? What does anything mean? What I think it means is we're not living in a way that is, heck yeah, go with me. I think what I mean by that is we so poorly understand what it means to die. And why do I think that's something that we have inherited from a Judeo-Christian mindset in America? I think that the concept of an afterlife in America has been very firmly engraved in everyone's minds. I don't think anyone grows up and has zero frame of reference for an afterlife. I think, and you can make all sorts of arguments that that's just how we're wired, because it's true. You can make arguments because it comforts us, mythological, collective consciousness, all sorts of arguments you could get into as to why that's natural. A natural framework to grow up with. And I tend to go with more of the we're taught everything perspective. But we're raised with a concept of the afterlife. And I think that can be good in and of itself. I think that can have a lot of value. But I think that to an extent, the way we talk about it and have this family-oriented, almost ancestral line of, if your parents were Christian, when they have you, you'll also be Christian. And then you all die as Christians and go to heaven. And in typical American frameworks, and this is, again, because I run in circles that are theologically driven, this is not as prevalent of a thought, but I think it's present in the general American mindset, and maybe to a larger extent with the general Western mindset. The afterlife feels promised. It feels, it's often sold to us as something that is a given, that we're going to die and live on, and there's very little involved in that process. And I think that's something that we've inherited from our families, and I think that gives us not a lack of fear. I'm not trying to get at a fear of death, but I think it gives us a lack of understanding about the weightiness of death. because death's a heavy thing. And of course, I think there's many people out there who, if they do watch this, if anyone watches this, I think they'll say, well, no, I deeply understand the weightiness of death. And I would say the same thing until I watched this show and was forced to think about it more. And then I realized that I don't really think about death or confront death on very, well, I want to be careful with the word I use here. I don't confront death with deeply, I hear my dog barking again. Let's let her in. I don't confront death. I want to say honest. I want to say I don't confront death with an honest mindset. And maybe this is the right way to put it. I don't confront death with an open mindset. And that might be a weird way to phrase it. And perhaps it actually is a weird way to phrase it. But when I confront death in my mind, I think on some level, I do have that general Western mindset I just talked about. I think I tend to brush it off and say, oh, well, yeah, everyone dies, and that's fine and normal, and I don't need to confront that in any meaningful way. And I think that's the wrong way to go about it. I think I'm going to take these off because I don't even need them. I'm not looking at anything. I'll say I because I don't want to impose this way of thinking on everyone. I feel like I look at death through a different but equally prevalent lens. And as the rise in secularism, academic, irreligious perspectives grow in the West, I think this is also a prevalent idea that we write up death to such a natural thing. And this might be something else inherited from Western and American religion. This might be something that we've inherited from Puritans and Pilgrims as well. And I think a lot of people would argue it is, because a lot of people argue secularism is the birth of hyper-religiosism. But whatever, that's not a word, religiousism, religiosity. Anyways, bunny trail, don't need to go there. I think that we often, at least myself, those of us who might run in more frequently academic circles or consider themselves not particularly spiritual or religious. And I mean, I've identified as a Christian. I identify as one, no matter how loosely that may be in my behavior's terms. I think I tend to approach death in this new way, this new irreligious perspective. And that's because I think I've been groomed to be an academic. And that's just, I think, a part of this is what is the word I want to use? It's a symptom of that, a symptom of that academic mentality. That I approach death as something so natural and so ubiquitous that I can brush it aside and say, well, that just happens to everyone, so I don't need to think about it. That happens to everyone, so it doesn't have to enter into my realm of concern because it just happens, so get over it, right? Well, I don't think that's right. I don't think that's right at all, because if we treat death in that way, I don't think we're treating it any better than guaranteeing ourselves an afterlife. In a way, I think it's doing the very same thing. It's saying, well, death doesn't matter, so I'll just never think about it. I'll never be concerned with it. And I think we have to hit a happy medium. How do we do that? I don't know. I don't know how we do that. I think we do it by confronting death honestly. And what do I mean by honestly confronting death? Well, perhaps I'm saying this in a way that makes people uncomfortable. And if I guess, maybe to some extent, if I say something that makes people uncomfortable, I'm saying something that's right. That's not necessarily true, because people who say things that are wrong almost always attract someone who's going to be offended or turned off by that. But I think confronting death honestly is being willing to say, I don't know what's going to happen to me when I die. And I think that's a thing that makes a lot of people really uncomfortable, because I don't think this is the whole reason people become religious. I don't think it's the whole reason people become secular either. But to an extent, both offer this comfort of knowing what happens to you after you die. On the one hand, you say, I know nothing happens to me when I die, so I don't have to be concerned with death. And on the other hand, you say, well, I know what's going to happen to me when I die. I go to heaven, and that's the end of it. I think they both end up in the same place, saying, I'm certain of what happens after this, so I don't need to approach death with such a sincerity. And I believe both types of people can take death extremely sincere, especially if they've experienced loss, because I think you can say that on the one hand. And I'll be honest, I'm not someone who's encountered a lot of death. A lot of my family had children fairly young. So I've only experienced one or two deaths of relatives that were very far removed from me. So I'm not someone who I'd consider has experienced a lot of death, which I think is a fairly modern thing, modern phenomenon, not experiencing a ton of death. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's just my limited perspective and experiences talking. But all of that said, I think if we approach death, no matter how certain we are in our convictions, with this sort of mentality that, well, I honestly don't know what will happen to me. I have strong convictions and believe a certain thing will happen to me, but I need to be honest with myself here. That death is painful. It doesn't feel very natural, because I think if it felt natural when someone died, we'd never cry or mourn, and we'd just move on, which is maybe some people out there feel that way. And if they do, I don't know if that's good or bad. I won't make any call on that. But I think we do need to approach death with this sort of, the term will put people off, and that's okay. I think we need to approach death with an agnostic mindset. And you can believe whatever you want to believe. You can say you know what will happen to you, but I think to an extent saying that is a little dishonest. I mean, no matter how convinced you are of Christianity and how much you know Christianity is true, and a lot of people speak in terms of certainty, and that's fine. That's good. I think it's very good. I'll say this as a little disclaimer. It is certainly good to be so deeply convinced of your convictions that you can say you know something. I think that's a sign of a good conviction, because it means you truly believe it. That means you truly believe it. And I think that's a great thing. But at the same time, I think there needs to be a healthy awareness that we don't know nearly as much as we wish we knew. And I think that mindset taken with firm belief can be exceedingly beneficial, because if you're a Christian, while the afterlife is extraordinary and ultimately is a focus, I don't think you can neglect life here and now. And I think if you do, you're missing out on not a certain experience, but you're missing out on, well, I'll put it this way. I feel like if you neglect the here and now in terms of approaching things with sincerity and approaching things with an understanding of their value, if you approach this life with a misevaluation of it lower than it is, and prioritize the afterlife over this one rather than equally valuing them, I think what's going to happen is you're missing out on something that God gave human beings, which is life here and now. If life here and now wasn't important, I believe he would have just put us in heaven and said that's the end of that. We don't need this life here and now. We don't need death. And you can theologically rationalize your way out of that if you desire, and that's your prerogative. But at the same time, I think it's going to produce an unhealthy relationship with life here and now if you don't have an honest and kind of open-minded perspective on death. That's my thoughts on that. I think that's good. I think that's all my thoughts right now. I just kind of wanted to get that all out of my head and as I thought about it. And I just want to kind of think about it in real time, with the possibility for people to make comments here for me to continue thinking about it. Because this is a thought that I feel is going to preoccupy me for the next few days, maybe weeks, maybe for the rest of my life, maybe hopefully for the rest of my life. But it's something to think about, I think, for everybody. And I kind of wanted to put it out there. And it's in the musing channel on Discord, because I am musing. This is me just sort of throwing out thoughts and reflecting and getting that opportunity for feedback. But now I'm just repeating myself, so it doesn't matter. So yeah, we'll call that the end of the stream. I just kind of wanted to play with it. I've been wanting to make more YouTube videos, and I think I'm too obsessed with perfection. And so if I just throw all of that out the window and make a video and move on with myself, I actually make something like I did here. So it's there, and I'm going to keep it. It's public. It's out there. So yeah, just a big step for me. Maybe this will be a thing I do from now on. Just make videos like this of me musing about things that maybe only I care about. And I think I should be able to say that's fine. So it's fine if only I care about that. And this is just an open channel for it. So yeah, end of the stream. Thanks to those of you who dropped by. It was fun. It's a cool little experiment for me. This is something new. So yeah, hope you guys have a good one. Enjoy yourselves. Make the best of this Friday that this is recorded on. Yeah, that's it. All right. See ya. Bye.